6 Japanese fighters circle above. A lone Allied bomber limps through the sky, wings torn, one engine trailing smoke thick enough to taste even through sealed canopy glass. The crew expects the kill shot any second. Hydraulic fluid sprays across the cockpit windshield in arterial pulses. Below, the Coral Sea stretches endless and indifferent, ready to swallow wreckage without ceremony. The pilot does something that breaks every rule in the manual. His hand pulls the throttle back. The aircraft shudders, decelerating against every instinct screaming in his brain. Airspeed drops from 180 knots to 140 in 3 heartbeats. The enemy fighters overshoot, their formation breaking apart in midair like a flock startled by unexpected movement. What happens next will be studied in flight schools for decades, though his name will fade from the reports. New Guinea, 1943. The sky above the Coral Sea is not romantic. It smells of aviation fuel and burnt rubber, of unwashed bodies crammed into metal tubes at 12,000 feet. The heat inside a B-25 Mitchell bomber turns the cockpit into a sweat box where men cook slowly in their own uniforms. Radio chatter crackles with static and panic, voices clipped short by distance or death. Below, the jungle stretches endless and green, swallowing wreckage without leaving scars. Pilots joke that if you ditch in those trees, the vines will have covered your plane before rescue crews can spot the smoke. Nobody laughs when they say it. This is the 5th Air Force operating under General George Kenney. They fly long missions over water with no margin for error. If your engines fail, you ditch. If you ditch, you disappear. The math is simple and the ocean keeps excellent records. The Japanese control the skies in pockets, and their Zero fighters are faster, more agile, flown by pilots trained since childhood in the religion of aerial combat. Every American bomber crew knows the statistics, even if they pretend not to. 3 sorties average before your replacement paperwork. Some last one. American bomber crews are losing planes at a rate that keeps intelligence officers awake at night. Replacements arrive weekly, fresh-faced and undertrained, carrying photographs of sweethearts and mothers. Some of those photos come back stained with hydraulic fluid or blood. Most don't come back at all. At WW2 airfield, the ground crew chief stands in the pre-dawn darkness, explaining mathematics to a new replacement pilot. The kid's name doesn't matter. Nobody learns the new names anymore. The chief gestures toward the operations board where names are written in chalk because pencil is too permanent. Last week, we lost 4 bombers. Week before, 6. The replacement pilot's throat works silently. He's trying to calculate if his odds are better or worse than the training accident rate. You do the math, the chief says, and walks away to prep another plane that probably won't come home. Intelligence officers pore over translated Japanese pilot manuals captured from downed aircraft. The enemy training doctrine is methodical, almost surgical. Zero pilots drill attack angles until they can execute them blind. They coordinate in teams with hand signals visible across hundreds of yards of sky. They exploit bomber blind spots with the precision of anatomists identifying arteries. The 5th Air Force tries everything. They add more guns. They alter flight paths. They schedule missions at different times, different altitudes, different formations. Nothing changes the fundamental equation written in burning aluminum and floating debris. A zero can outmaneuver a bomber. Period. Some pilots try wild evasive tactics anyway, diving, banking hard, spiraling like wounded birds. Most crash or stall out before the enemy guns finish them. A few survive and are grounded for recklessness, their stories used as cautionary examples in briefings. The message is clear. Do not experiment. Follow procedure, accept the losses. The doctrine says maintain speed, stay in formation, rely on defensive guns. Do not deviate. Into this grinder steps a pilot named Jay Zeamer Jr. He does not look like a warrior. Tall, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses that fog in the humidity and require constant adjustment. A graduate of MIT with a degree in civil engineering. He speaks in careful sentences as if every word has been triple-checked for structural integrity. His movements are precise, economical, calculated. His crewmates call him Jay behind his back. Some call him the bookworm. A few use less flattering terms when they think he can't hear. He can always hear. The officer's tent at WW2 is a canvas sauna filled with the smell of mildew and cigarette smoke. Card games rage in the corner with the intensity of men gambling away hours they might not live to spend. Laughter erupts in sharp bursts, too loud, too forced. Zeamer sits alone near the entrance, reading a technical manual by lamplight. The pages are dog-eared, covered in margin notes written in his careful engineer's handwriting. Diagrams of aircraft stress points, calculations of fuel consumption rates under various combat loads. A pilot stumbles past, drunk on rot-gut whiskey someone distilled from God knows what. "Still studying, Professor?" Zeamer doesn't look up from the manual. His finger traces a line of text about wing loading and structural failure points. The drunk pilot leans closer, breath sharp with alcohol. "You know what your problem is, Zeamer. You think too much. Combat ain't a math test." Zeamer turns the page. "Combat is exactly a math test. You just don't know the equations." The drunk pilot laughs and staggers away to rejoin the card game. Within 2 weeks, he'll be dead over Rabal, shot down while following doctrine perfectly. Zeamer reads obsessively. While others play cards or write letters home, he sits in the corner with after-action reports, translated Japanese flight doctrine, technical specifications for aircraft he'll never fly. He sketches diagrams in the margins. He asks questions that irritate his commanding officers. At a squadron briefing, the operations officer is explaining the next day's mission route. Standard bombing run, standard altitude, standard everything. "Follow the doctrine." Zeamer's hand goes up. The operations officer sighs audibly. "Yes, Captain Zeamer." "Sir, why do we always engage at their optimal altitude? The zeros are designed for high-altitude interception. What if we follow the mission parameters as briefed, Captain?" The room goes quiet. Other pilots study their boots or the ceiling or anything except the confrontation developing at the front of the tent. "I'm simply asking if we've considered alternatives to—" "Alternatives have been considered by people with more combat experience than you, Captain. Your job is to fly the mission, not redesign Air Force doctrine." Zeamer nods slowly and lowers his hand, but his jaw is tight and his eyes don't leave the operations map on the wall. After the briefing, pilots file out in clusters, talking in low voices about tomorrow's target. Zeamer lingers, studying the map alone. His finger traces potential flight paths, measuring distances, calculating fuel requirements. A major stops beside him. "Zeamer, you need to learn when to shut up." "I need to learn how to keep people alive, sir." The major's expression softens slightly, something almost like pity crossing his face. "Then learn to follow orders. Dead heroes don't teach anyone anything." Transfer orders arrive regularly for Zeamer. He's been reassigned 6 times in 8 months, flowing between squadrons like a spare part nobody wants to install. He flies co-pilot missions, fills in for the sick, racks up flight hours without ever commanding his own crew. It's a quiet form of exile. The war is full of men like him, competent enough to keep around, too odd to promote, too valuable to discharge, but too irregular to trust with anything important. When one evaluation report calls him hesitant under simulated combat stress, another flags him for over-analysis leading to decision paralysis. A third notes his technical aptitude, but questions his instinctive aggression. Zeamer reads these evaluations in the privacy of his tent, filing them away in his footlocker without comment. He doesn't argue. He doesn't defend himself. He simply continues his private research, filling notebooks with observations nobody asked for. He notices things, small things, patterns that others dismiss as random. Japanese fighters always attack from specific angles. Anti-aircraft fire follows predictable patterns based on altitude and speed. Enemy pilots hesitate when bombers behave unpredictably, even slightly. During a milk-run mission flying co-pilot, Zeamer watches the pilot respond to a single zero, harassing their formation. The pilot does everything by the book. Maximum throttle, level flight, rely on gunners. The zero sits comfortably in their tail blind spot and fires leisurely, walking tracers across the fuselage until something vital ruptures. They make it back to base trailing smoke. 2 engines damaged, 1 gunner dead. That night, Zeamer sits in the darkness outside his tent with his notebook, sketching attack geometry by moonlight. He draws the zero's approach angle, the bomber's defensive cone of fire, the overlap where death lives. Then he draws something different, a variation. What if the bomber suddenly decelerated? The Zero's momentum would carry it past. For 2, maybe 3 seconds, the fighter would be exposed to defensive guns. It violates every instinct. Speed equals survival. Everyone knows this. It's written in blood across 1,000 after-action reports. But Zeamer sees a flaw in that logic. If you cannot outrun them and you cannot outturn them, what remains? He starts testing small variations on missions where he has control, flying slightly slower on approach, altering attack runs by 30 seconds, changing altitude in increments that break the gunner's rhythm. Nothing dramatic, nothing that violates orders directly, just marginal adjustments. His missions start having lower casualty rates, fewer hits, cleaner exits. Other pilots dismiss it as luck. Zeamer dismisses it as probability. He doesn't boast. He keeps refining the math. Then something shifts in him. A decision crystallizes during another card game where he's reading and being ignored. He closes his notebook and stands. He starts volunteering for missions nobody else will take. Reconnaissance flights deep into enemy airspace, photo mapping with outdated planes and skeleton crews, intelligence gathering where you come back with data or you don't come back at all. The operations officer stares at him across the assignment desk. Zeamer, you understand these are voluntary because we expect them to be fatal? I understand the mathematics, sir. Someone has to fly them. Might as well be someone who's thought about how to survive. Thought too much, some would say. Not enough, I'd say. He begins assembling a crew, not from the elite pilots or the decorated veterans. He recruits from the rejected, the damaged, the men written off by the system, the bombardier he finds in a medical tent. Sarnosky. Malaria scars cover his arms like topographic maps. His hands shake from medication, tremors running through his fingers in visible waves. The doctors are processing his medical discharge paperwork. Zeamer stands at the foot of his cot. Can you still see through a bomb sight? Sarnosky looks up, eyes hollow from fever. Better than anyone in this shithole. Then you're not done. Fly with me. Sarnosky's hands stop shaking, just for a moment. Something focuses in his expression. You serious? I don't joke about crew positions. 3 days later, Sarnosky walks out of the medical tent against doctor's orders, carrying his gear and reporting for duty. The navigator Zeamer wants his name Pudge, though nobody remembers his real name anymore. He's sitting alone at the officers' club, drinking slowly, methodically. There's a haunted quality to his eyes that goes beyond normal combat fatigue. Zeamer sits down across from him without invitation. I heard about your crash landing. Pudge's jaw tightens. He doesn't look up from his drink. Everyone's heard. It's a great story at parties. I heard you swam 5 miles to shore after your plane went down. 5 miles in open ocean. Yeah, what's your point? My point is that swimming 5 miles means you didn't panic. You calculated distance, conserved energy, picked a direction, and committed. That's the kind of navigator I need. Pudge finally looks at him. You need a navigator who crashed his plane? I need a navigator who survived when he shouldn't have. There's a difference. Pudge studies Zeamer's face for a long moment, searching for mockery or pity. Finding neither, he sets down his drink. What kind of missions? The kind where navigation matters more than firepower. The kind nobody comes back from? The kind where good navigation means we might. Pudge signs on that night. The tail gunner Zeamer recruits from the brig. Able. The charges are insubordination and striking a superior officer. He punched a squadron leader who ordered a reckless attack run that would have killed his entire crew. 3 men died anyway when another pilot followed the order. Zeamer walks past the military police guard without explaining himself. The guard doesn't stop him. Everyone knows Zeamer by now, the odd captain who reads too much and volunteers for suicide missions. Abel sits on the cell bunk, knuckles bandaged, expression somewhere between defiant and resigned. You here to judge me too, Captain? I'm here because you were right. That order was suicide. Abel's eyes narrow. Then why didn't you say something? I did. They didn't listen. Maybe if there are enough of us, they will. Enough of us what? Insubordinates? People who do math before pulling triggers. Abel laughs, but there's no humor in it. Math. You want me to fly with a captain who thinks combat is an equation. I want you to fly with a captain who knows combat is exactly an equation. The variables are physics, fuel, ammunition, human reaction time. Everything else is noise. Abel stands slowly, walking to the cell bars. What happens when the math is wrong? Then we die, but at least we die trying something smarter than blind courage. The charges against Abel are quietly dropped 2 days later. He reports to Zeamer's crew without ceremony. They strip down a beaten B-25, tail number 41301. The ground crews think they're insane. The plane has been written off twice, patched with aluminum tape and prayers. It should be scrap metal. But Zeamer sees potential in the old bomber. He reinforces the gun positions personally, adding an extra forward-facing cannon. He runs fuel calculations down to the gallon, mapping out range limits with mathematical precision. He briefs his crew not with inspirational speeches, but with numbers. If we burn fuel at this rate, we have 17 minutes over target. If we take fire here, we divert here. If the engine quits, we glide this far. It's not inspiring. It's accurate. Sarnosky speaks up from his position, checking the bomb site. First pilot who's ever talked to me like I have a brain. Pudge nods from the navigator's station. First crew that doesn't think surviving is about luck. Abel Chambers rounds into his tail gun. First outfit where someone's actually trying to keep us alive instead of just win medals. They fly their first mission together in late May. A milk run, no combat expected. Photo reconnaissance of abandoned Japanese positions. The kind of mission designed to shake down new crews without risk. Zeamer briefs them with the same mathematical precision he applies to everything. We're burning fuel at this rate. That gives us these margins. If anything changes, we recalculate. Questions? Nobody has questions. They know the numbers. They've reviewed them individually and trust the preparation. The mission goes perfectly. They photograph the target, return to base, land without incident. As they climb out of the plane, Sarnosky turns to Zeamer. Boss, can I ask you something? Always. Why did you pick us? We're all damaged goods, medical discharges, brig time, crash survivors. You could have picked from the top pilots. Zeamer adjusts his glasses, wiping fog from the lenses. Top pilots follow instinct. I needed people who learned to think when instinct failed them. You swam 5 miles, Pudge calculated his way back. Sarnosky sees through fever. Abel sees through bad orders. That's the crew I need. They fly 6 more missions together through early June. Low-risk assignments, building trust and procedures. Zeamer continues his private research, filling notebooks with observations. His crew notices he never panics, never raises his voice, never stops calculating. During one mission when an engine catches fire over the Bismarck Sea, Zeamer's voice comes through the intercom with clinical precision. Oil pressure dropping, altitude loss at 200 feet per minute, trim compensating, feathering engine. We have 17 minutes to coast with remaining fuel and altitude, diverting to alternate landing zone. His tone doesn't change. He could be reading grocery lists, but the crew relaxes because the situation is under control. There's a plan. The math works. They land safely at a forward airstrip, repair the engine, fly home the next day. By mid-June, Zeamer has flown more than 40 missions. He's still a captain, still overlooked, still the bookworm, but his crew is loyal in a way that transcends rank or regulations. They know he won't waste them, won't showboat, won't trade their lives for glory or advancement. He'll calculate their survival and execute it with the same precision he applies to bridge engineering calculations. That loyalty will be tested when Zeamer walks into the operations tent on June 15th and volunteers for a mission that everyone knows is a death sentence. The problem facing the 5th Air Force in 1943 isn't just tactical, it's mathematical. They need intelligence on Japanese installations at Bougainville, deep reconnaissance photos of airfields, harbor facilities, troop concentrations, the kind of intelligence that requires flying alone into the most heavily defended airspace in the Pacific. No fighter escort, no backup, no rescue if you go down. The operations officer spreads the map across the briefing table. Senior pilots stand around it, studying the coordinates with the expression of surgeons examining terminal patients. We need photo reconnaissance of Buka here. His finger taps a point deep in Japanese-controlled territory. Someone whistles low. That's 200 miles beyond our fighter range. Correct, which is why this mission is classified as voluntary. The tent goes quiet. Everyone understands what voluntary means in this context. It means we need someone to die for this information. Expected enemy resistance? Heavy. Multiple Zero squadrons operate from the airfields we need you to photograph. They'll scramble the moment you're detected. Survival probability? The operations officer doesn't answer immediately. He doesn't need to. The silence is answer enough. It's voluntary, he repeats. Nobody volunteers. Pilots exchange glances, calculating odds, finding them all bad. Then Zeamer steps forward. I'll take it. The operations officer looks up, surprised. Zeamer, do you understand what voluntary means? Yes, sir. It means someone has to go, and it might as well be someone who's thought about how to survive it. Thought about it. You've calculated a way to come back from this? I've calculated that the alternative is sending someone who hasn't thought about it at all. That's worse odds. The operations officer studies him for a long moment. Other pilots are already leaving the tent, relieved they don't have to volunteer themselves. Your crew agrees to this? I'll ask them, sir. But I believe they will. Why would they? Zeamer meets his gaze steadily. Because they know I do math before making promises. That evening, Zeamer gathers his crew in the shadow of their B-25. The sun is setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in colors that would be beautiful if they didn't remind everyone of fire. He doesn't soften the briefing. He lays out the map, shows them the coordinates, explains the mission parameters. This is a death sentence. Intelligence admits it. The math says we have approximately a 12% chance of returning. Sarnosky speaks first. What are the odds if anyone else flies it? Zeamer doesn't hesitate. About 3%, maybe less. Nobody else is thinking about solutions. They're thinking about following doctrine. Pudge leans over the map, measuring distances with his fingers. And you have solutions? I have theories. Untested theories. Better than no theories. Abel chambers around into his service pistol, checking the action. Boss, we all know why we're on this crew. We're the ones the system gave up on. Medical discharge, court-martial, crash survivor. Nobody expects us to matter. Zeamer adjusts his glasses. I expect you to matter. That's why I chose you. Sarnosky's hands are shaking again. Malaria medication wearing off. But his voice is steady. Then let's make history. Or at least make them remember we tried. The decision is made without formal vote. They simply begin preparations, each man moving to his station, checking equipment, running calculations. Zeamer watches them work and feels something unexpected. Not pride, exactly. Gratitude, perhaps. These broken men are trusting him with their lives, based on math and theories and a reputation for not wasting people. He pulls out his notebook one more time. The pages are filled with diagrams, calculations, observations. At the bottom of the last page, he writes a final note. If this works, it changes everything. If it fails, at least we tried thinking instead of just dying. He closes the notebook and tucks it into his flight suit pocket. Pre-mission preparation takes on ritual significance. Zeamer inspects every rivet personally, running his hands along the fuselage, feeling for stress fractures or weaknesses. He checks the gun mounts himself, testing traverse and elevation. He reviews fuel calculations with Pudge 3 times, measuring margins down to the last usable gallon. Abel test fires his guns at triple the normal rate, burning through ammunition belts to verify feed mechanisms. Sarnosky checks and rechecks his bomb sight even though they won't be bombing, because precision matters regardless of mission parameters. They work in silence mostly, each man focused on his responsibilities. But there's communication in the silence, an understanding that they're preparing for something bigger than a mission. They're preparing to prove something. That intellect can defeat instinct. That calculation can outlast courage. That thinking doesn't make you a coward, it makes you dangerous. As night falls, they write letters home, not because they expect to die, but because ritual matters. Zeamer writes to his parents in careful engineering handwriting, explaining nothing and everything simultaneously. The ground crew chief approaches Zeamer near midnight. The old plane sits alone on the tarmac, shadowed and patient. Captain, you know this bird's been written off twice. She's held together with hope and aluminum tape. Should have been scrapped months ago. Zeamer touches the fuselage, feeling the rivets beneath his palm. Good. Then we're a match. Nobody expected us to matter either. The chief laughs, but there's respect in it. You're either crazy or brilliant, sir. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Dawn comes too quickly and too slowly, simultaneously. At 0400 hours, they assemble at the aircraft. Nobody speaks. There's nothing left to say. Zeamer climbs into the cockpit and begins the pre-flight checklist. His hands move through familiar motions. Switch positions, gauge readings, control surfaces, everything mechanical and precise. Sarnowski slides into the bombardier position below. Boss, you really think this throttle trick will work? The one you're always sketching? Zeamer's hands pause on the controls. I think physics doesn't lie. People do. Equations don't. What if you're wrong? The engines cough to life, propellers spinning into invisibility. Then we die like everyone expected us to. But at least we'll die trying something smarter than just following orders that don't work. Pudge settles into the navigator station. Course is laid in, boss. 200 miles to target. After that, it's all you. Abel checks his tail gun one final time. Permission to speak freely, Captain? Always. This is insane. We're flying into the teeth of their fighter defenses with no support, no backup, no chance of rescue. And our ace in the hole is a math equation you came up with by watching birds. Zeamer adjusts his glasses, checking instrument readings. That's an accurate summary. Yes. I just wanted to make sure I understood the situation clearly. Do you have objections? Abel's laugh crackles through the intercom. Hell no, sir. I'm just saying if we pull this off, the entire Air Force is going to owe you an apology. I'm not interested in apologies, just survival. The tower clears them for takeoff. Zeamer pushes the throttles forward, and the old B-25 lurches into motion, gaining speed, fighting gravity and probability simultaneously. They lift off into darkness, climbing slowly, turning north toward enemy territory in certain contact. The ocean below is black and featureless. The stars above are cold and distant. Between those two voids, 6 men fly toward mathematics and faith. Zeamer's notebook sits in his pocket, pages filled with calculations that might save their lives or document their foolishness. Either way, the equations are sound. The math doesn't lie. It never does. In 3 hours, they'll be over Bougainville. In 3 hours, they'll encounter 6 Zero fighters. In 3 hours, everything Zeamer has theorized will be tested against reality. His hand rests on the throttle, feeling the vibration of engines through metal. Soon he'll do something that contradicts every instinct, every doctrine, every rule written in the blood of dead pilots. He'll slow down and either prove that intellect can triumph over instinct or die confirming that courage without thought is still just death. The bomber disappears into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying 6 misfits toward a mission that should be impossible. Behind them, the base operations officer marks their departure time in the log with notation that reads simply, voluntary reconnaissance. Expected return? Unlikely. But he doesn't know about the notebook. He doesn't know about the calculations. He doesn't know that Zeamer has spent months preparing for exactly this moment, gaming out scenarios, measuring angles, calculating windows of opportunity measured in seconds. Nobody knows except the crew in that aircraft. And in a few hours, either the world will learn something new about aerial combat, or 6 more names will be chalked onto the casualty board and erased when nobody can remember how to spell them anymore. The smartest move isn't always the fastest. Sometimes it's the one nobody expects. The ocean is ink beneath them. Flying at wave-top height makes the darkness absolute, navigation reduced to instruments and faith. Salt spray occasionally miss the windscreen when they dip too low, reminding them how thin the margin is between controlled flight and catastrophic impact. Zeamer's hands rest light on the controls, feeling the bomber's rhythm through his fingertips. Every aircraft has a personality expressed in vibration and response. This one flies like an old workhorse, steady but tired, compensating for years of damage with stubborn momentum. Pudge hunches over his navigator station, pencil scratching calculations on acetate charts under dim red light. Course holding steady at 342. We're burning fuel faster than predicted. Winds against us. How much faster? 6% over baseline, still within margins but barely. Zeamer makes mental adjustments, calculating new arrival times and revised fuel reserves. Every number matters. Every margin counts. Behind him, Abel shifts in the tail gunner position, staring into absolute darkness. Can't see anything back here. No stars, no horizon, just black. That's intentional. If we can't see them, radar can't paint us clearly either. Assuming their radar works like we think it does. Assuming a lot of things today. The engines drone steadily, a sound that becomes hypnotic over time. White noise that fills consciousness until you stop hearing it as sound and feel it as pressure against your skull. Zeamer uses the time to run through scenarios. He's mapped out 17 different encounter configurations, each with optimal response patterns. Attack from above requires different timing than stern pursuit. Multiple fighters demand different calculations than solo interceptors. But theory is sterile. Reality brings variables no equation can predict. Human hesitation, mechanical failure, pure chance. His right hand tests throttle response, pushing forward slightly then pulling back, feeling how the bomber reacts to input. The deceleration curve is smoother than expected. Good. He'll need that precision. Landfall in 5 minutes. Pudge's voice cuts through the engine drone. Ahead, the darkness begins differentiating into shades. Landmass emerging from ocean, visible only because it's slightly less black than the water. Taking her up to photo altitude. 12,000 feet. Zeamer pulls back on the yoke gently. The bomber climbs, engines straining. Air temperature drops as they ascend, frost forming on the canopy edges. Below, Bougainville materializes in the growing dawn light. Japanese installations spread across the landscape like circuit diagrams. 3 airfields visible, not 2 as intelligence predicted. Fuel depots, transport ships in the harbor, anti-aircraft batteries positioned in geometric patterns around critical assets. Sarnosky presses against his bomb site, camera equipment humming. Jesus, there's more here than reported. This is a major staging area. Keep shooting, we need everything. The sunrise paints the sky in gradients from black to purple to burning orange, a beautiful and terrible simultaneously. High-altitude air smells clean, almost metallic, so different from the swamp humidity at ground level. Zeamer maintains level flight, giving Sarnosky stable platform for photography. Each second over target increases risk exponentially, but incomplete intelligence is worthless intelligence. 30 seconds pass. 40. Abel's voice cuts through the intercom, sharp with tension. Contact, 6 o'clock, low. Climbing fast. Zeamer's peripheral vision catches movement. A dark shape ascending from below, sunlight glinting off metal surfaces. Then another, and another. I count 4. No, 6. 6 fighters circling. The Zeros don't attack immediately. They spiral upward, gaining altitude, positioning themselves with tactical patience. These aren't impulsive pilots. They're trained, coordinated, waiting for optimal engagement geometry. Sarnosky, how long? 45 seconds to complete the grid. We hold course. The Zeros tighten their circle, wolves assessing prey. One breaks formation slightly, testing, probing for reaction. Zeamer ignores it, maintaining steady flight. Any deviation now signals fear, invites attack. The seconds stretch. Time becomes elastic under scrutiny from enemy guns. Sarnosky's hands shake as he advances the camera mechanism, malaria tremors amplified by adrenaline. 30 seconds. The lead Zero drops lower, accelerating into attack position. Not committing yet, still measuring, calculating. 20 seconds. Zeamer watches the enemy formation through his canopy. They're coordinating with hand signals, preparing synchronized assault. The math is simple. 6 fighters can attack from multiple angles simultaneously, overwhelming defensive guns through pure geometry. 10 seconds. The formation splits. Too high, too level, too low. Classic box attack pattern. No matter which direction the bomber turns, multiple fighters will have firing solutions. Complete. Full grid photographed. Turning east. Full throttle. Zeamer banks hard, pushing the throttles to maximum. The old bomber accelerates sluggishly, Momentum fighting against decades of accumulated damage. Airspeed climbs, 120 knots, 140, 160. The Zeros close the gap effortlessly. Their Mitsubishi engines are newer, lighter, designed for speed and maneuverability. The American bomber is a cargo truck trying to outrun racing cars. Closure rate steady. They're gaining. Pudge's voice stays level, professional, but tension underlies every word. The first Zero commits. It dives from above. Classic textbook approach. The pilot has done this 100 times, muscle memory guiding every input. Sound changes first. The high-pitched scream of a radial engine at full power, distinct from the deeper rumble of the bomber. Then visual. The fighter growing larger in Zeamer's peripheral vision. Closing at impossible speed. Tracers flash past the canopy, bright even in daylight. The sound follows, sharp cracks as bullets pass through air, where they were seconds ago. Able opens fire, turret traversing, trying to lead the target. Brass casings spray across the deck, hot metal bouncing off bulkheads. The Zero pulls up, overshooting slightly but untouched. It climbs vertically, bleeding speed, preparing for another pass. Hits! Taking hits! The impact sounds like someone throwing gravel against tin. Multiple strikes perforate the tail section. Alarms scream as hydraulic pressure drops, warning lights illuminating across the instrument panel. Hydraulics failing. Pressure down to 40%. Zeamer scans gauges rapidly. Altitude control compromised. Their bleeding height at 200 feet per minute. Gradual but inexorable. Compensating with trim. Everyone check your stations. A second Zero attacks from below, patient and methodical. This pilot waits for the bomber to stabilize after the first attack, exploiting the predictable recovery pattern. Zeamer maintains doctrine. Full throttle, level flight, rely on defensive guns. The manual is clear on this. Don't deviate. But the Zero sits perfectly in the blind spot beneath the tail, exactly where doctrine predicts the bomber will be during evasion. The enemy pilot fires sustained bursts, walking rounds up the fuselage with surgical precision. More alarms. Engine 2 temperature gauge climbs into red, oil pressure fluctuating. Smoke trails from the cowling, thin at first, then thickening. Engine 2 compromised, temperature critical. The bomber shudders, losing power from the damaged engine. Airspeed drops. 160 knots, 150, 140. Slower means more vulnerable. Every pilot knows this. It's written in bone and wreckage. Sarnowski's voice comes through strained, pain evident. Took shrapnel. Not bad, but bleeding. How bad is not bad? Bad enough to hurt, not bad enough to stop working. Abel's position takes more hits. The tail section is being systematically destroyed, aluminum skin peeling away in strips. Boss, we're getting carved up back here. Standard evasion isn't working. A third Zero positions for attack. 4 more circle, waiting their turn. They have time. They have speed. They have the advantage in every measurable category. They're just lining up shots. We're target practice. Pudge sounds frustrated more than afraid. The mathematics are undeniable. They cannot outrun, cannot outturn, cannot outlast. Zeamer watches the formation pattern. His mind processes angles, velocities, attack sequences. The Zeros are disciplined, following proven tactics that work 99 times out of 100, which means they expect specific responses. They've trained against bombers that behave predictably. Maximum speed, level flight, desperation. His hand moves toward the throttle, not pushing forward, resting there, feeling the vibration. The third Zero begins its run, 7 o'clock high, diving with the sun behind it. Classic approach, using glare for concealment. In Zeamer's mind, equations unfold. Closure rate, 220 knots differential. Attack angle, 45 degrees. Commitment point, 400 yards. Once committed, the Zero needs 3 seconds to adjust course significantly. If the bomber suddenly decelerated, the fighter would overshoot. Momentum would carry it past. For approximately 2.8 seconds, it would be exposed to defensive fire with no evasion options. 2.8 seconds. Everything he's calculated for months comes down to this moment. Either the math is correct, or they die, proving it was wrong. His voice cuts through the intercom chatter, loud and clear. Everyone listen. I'm trying something. It's going to feel wrong. Trust me. Abel's confusion is audible. Boss, what are you? Trust me. The zero closes. 400 yards, 350, 300. Crew members brace for impact, expecting the familiar helplessness of being hunted. Zeamer's hand pulls the throttle back. Both engines simultaneously. Firm, decisive movement. The bomber shudders as if struck. Deceleration forces everything forward. Loose equipment slides. Bodies strain against restraints. The airspeed indicator needle drops like a stone. 180 knots, 160, 150, 140. Sound changes. Engine pitch drops. Wind noise decreases. The entire acoustic signature of flight shifts in seconds. The Zero pilot's brain processes information too slowly. He's committed to intercept geometry calculated on target velocity. But the target just changed velocity dramatically. Physics doesn't negotiate. Momentum carries the fighter past the bomber at combined closure speed exceeding 300 knots. The Zero screams by 150 yards ahead, unable to adjust, trapped by energy state and split-second decision-making. For exactly 2.8 seconds, it hangs in space directly in front of the B-25's top turret. Abel doesn't need instructions. Training takes over. He tracks the target smoothly, leading slightly for deflection, firing sustained burst. Tracers walk across the Zero's fuselage. 50 caliber rounds punch through thin aluminum skin designed for speed, not armor. Sparks erupt along the wing root. Smoke pours from the engine cowling. The Zero pulls up hard, trailing fire and vapor. Its climb becomes uncontrolled. The aircraft spirals, falling toward the ocean thousands of feet below. Silence on the intercom for 3 heartbeats. Then Abel's voice, awed and disbelieving. Holy shit, it worked. It actually worked. Sarnowski's laugh borders on hysteria. You slowed us down, in combat, and it worked. Pudge sounds like he's recalculating everything he knows about physics and probability. You crazy, magnificent bastard. Zeamer pushes the throttles forward, returning to cruise speed. His voice remains calm, clinical. 5 more. Sarnowski, watch your firing windows. This is going to get precise. The remaining Zeros don't understand what just happened. From their perspective, their lead aircraft attacked and died, cause uncertain. Radio chatter between pilots increases, audible as distant static. The second Zero approaches more cautiously, adjusting tactics. 4 o'clock level, slower closure rate. This pilot learned from watching the first kill. Zeamer adapts, not just throttle reduction this time. He adds variables. Pudge, call his closure rate. 220 knots, 215, holding steady at 210. Drop flaps, 5 degrees, now. Hydraulics whine as flaps extend slightly. The bomber decelerates from both throttle reduction and increased drag. Dual variable equation. The Zero overshoots faster than the first, caught by combined deceleration. The pilot pulls hard, trying to stay on target, but energy management becomes impossible. The waist gunner tracks smoothly, firing from optimal position. Rounds impact the Zero's wing root and engine mounts. Smoke erupts. The fighter breaks off hard, diving away trailing vapor. Not confirmed killed, but neutralized. Damage forces disengagement. 2 down, 4 remaining. The third and fourth Zeros coordinate, attempting pincer attack. 1 high, 1 low, trying to box the bomber into defensive geometry that allows no escape. Zeamer's brain processes the problem. 2 attackers, 2 vectors, single solution required. Abel, track high side. Sarnowski, you take low. Timing becomes critical. Both fighters closing simultaneously from different angles. If he mistimes the throttle reduction, one will maintain firing solution. He watches their approach, measuring convergence angles. Mathematics in motion. The high Zero commits first, diving. The low Zero follows half-second later. Now! Throttle back. 15-degree bank left. The bomber slews sideways through the air, decelerating and turning simultaneously. The high Zero overshoots, altitude advantage negated by unexpected maneuver. The low zero loses firing solution as the bank changes relative positions. Both break off, neither scoring hits. Able manages tracking shot that damages the high zero's tail section. The fighter wobbles, control compromised. 3 damaged or destroyed. 3 remaining. But the crew is paying prices. Sarnowski's wound bleeds steadily, soaking his flight suit. Abel's gun position is shot to pieces, armor plate perforated in multiple places. Pudge has shrapnel cuts across his arms from rounds that penetrated the navigator station. The bomber itself accumulates damage. Hydraulic fluid sprays in fine mist through ruptured lines. Engine 2 temperature remains critical, 1 step from total failure. Oil pressure fluctuates wildly. Zeamer's shirt is soaked with sweat despite the high-altitude cold. His hands cramp from gripping controls, fingers locked in position. His voice grows hoarse from shouting coordinates and instructions. But he doesn't stop calculating. Each engagement generates data. Each maneuver refines understanding. The 5th zero learns. This pilot hangs back, observing, analyzing. He's seen 4 separate attacks fail or result in damage. He understands the bomber is doing something unconventional. Patience becomes weapon. The zero approaches slowly, maintaining distance, refusing to commit to high-speed intercept. Zeamer recognizes the adaptation. The enemy pilot is thinking now, not just reacting to training. This one's smart. Stay sharp. The zero feints, diving as if to attack, then pulling up. Testing. Measuring response. Zeamer doesn't react. Maintains course. Refuses to reveal the throttle reduction timing. The zero tries again. Different angle. Another feint. Psychological warfare at 300 miles per hour. Finally, the fighter commits, approaching from 5 o'clock, slightly below. Not the textbook angle. An improvisation designed to counter anticipated evasion. Zeamer waits. The zero closes. 300 yards, 250, 200. Still waiting, 150. Now. Throttle back. Hard bank right. Drop altitude 200 feet simultaneously. Triple variable maneuver. The bomber shudders at the edge of aerodynamic stability. Controls mushy, buffeting through turbulent air. The zero adjusts mid-approach. Pilot skilled enough to adapt. But 3 variables exceed human reaction time. The fighter overshoots, barely losing optimal firing position for critical seconds. Coordinated gunfire from multiple positions walks across the zero's fuselage. Rounds impact engine, wing, cockpit. The fighter shudders mid-flight, then explodes. Fireball blooms in their wake, expanding sphere of orange flame and black smoke. Debris rains toward the ocean, pieces of aircraft and pilot tumbling separately. Cheering erupts on the intercom. Brief, exhausted, relieved. That's 5. 1 left. The final zero circles at distance, maintaining separation. This pilot has watched 5 aircraft damaged or destroyed. He knows continuing the engagement means probable death, but he doesn't disengage immediately. He stalks them, following, waiting for weakness or opportunity. Zeamer watches the zero through the canopy, maintaining awareness without fixation. He's smart, not committing without advantage. The chase continues for 10 minutes. The bomber flies east toward Allied airspace. The zero follows just beyond effective gun range, patient and dangerous. Then another zero appears. Fresh aircraft, full fuel, undamaged. Radio calls must have summoned reinforcements. Second contact, fresh fighter at 8 o'clock. The situation changes instantly. 1 damaged bomber versus 2 intact fighters. The mathematics shift unfavorably. Both zeros coordinate, preparing synchronized attack that will overwhelm defensive positions through pure geometric advantage. Zeamer's mind races through scenarios. All end badly. They're too damaged, too slow, too far from support. The zeros split, preparing pincer from opposite sides. Then miraculously, they both break off. Sharp turns away from engagement, diving toward home territory. Confusion on the intercom. What happened? Why'd they leave? Pudge checks his charts, calculating positions. We just crossed into Allied radar coverage. They don't want to risk interception this close to our fighters. Relief floods through the crew. Physical sensation, tension releasing from muscles they didn't know were clenched. They've survived. But survival brings new problems into sharp focus. Damage assessment. Everyone report. Sarnosky sounds weak. Shrapnel in chest and legs. Bleeding steady, not arterial but significant. Able, tail section is shredded. Over 200 holes visible from my position. Half my guns are inoperable. Hydraulic fluid everywhere. Pudge, navigation instruments, mostly functional. Some shrapnel damage. I can get us home. Zeamer scans his own instrument panel. The news is catastrophic. Engine 2 oil pressure, 0. Temperature, maximum. The engine is dying minutes from complete seizure. Hydraulics, 20% capacity. They're losing control authority with every passing minute. Fuel, leaking from multiple puncture points. Consumption rate exceeds supply rate. They have maybe 40 minutes before tanks run dry. Radio, dead. Shrapnel severed antenna connections. Compass, spinning uselessly. Something magnetic got damaged or displaced. We have 30 minutes of fuel remaining, maybe less. One engine failing. No radio. Limited controls. The math is simple and brutal. They might not make it home. Sarnosky's breathing becomes labored. The chest wound is worse than he admitted. Each breath whistles slightly, suggesting punctured lung. Boss, I need to stay conscious. Don't let them give me morphine if we ditch. Need to help if we go down. You're not going down. You're going home. But Zeamer's voice lacks its usual certainty. The variables are stacking against them. Engine 2 begins making grinding noises. Metal-on-metal friction as bearings fail. Temperature gauge pegs maximum. Needle buried in red. Shutting down engine 2. Feathering prop. He pulls the mixture to cutoff. Props into feather. The engine coughs, shudders, goes silent. The propeller blades rotate to minimum drag position. Single engine flight on a bomber designed for 2. Altitude bleeds away. 200 feet per minute descent rate, inexorable as gravity. They need to lose altitude anyway, burning less fuel at lower elevation. But controlled descent versus uncontrolled fall is a thin distinction. Abel crawls from his destroyed gun position toward the main cabin, trying to help Sarnosky. His movements are slow, hindered by his own wounds and the accumulating damage. Boss, we've got fuel streaming from the left wing. Looks like 3 separate punctures. Zeamer glances out his window. Gasoline vapor trails behind them, visible as shimmer in the air. Evaporating fuel, dissipating into atmosphere, taking their survival margin with it. Pudge, recalculate time to base on current fuel consumption. Long silence while Pudge runs numbers with damaged instruments and improvised estimations. 22 minutes, maybe 25 if we're lucky. Distance remaining? 30 minutes at current speed. The equation doesn't balance. They'll run out of fuel before reaching safety. Options? Pudge studies his charts, measuring alternatives. There's a forward airstrip on Woodlark Island, emergency landing zone for damaged aircraft. It's 15 minutes at current speed. Condition of the strip? Unknown. It's basically a cleared field. No tower, no support, just flat ground. Zeamer makes the calculation instantly. Certain death trying for home versus possible survival at the emergency strip. Setting course for Woodlark. Able secure Sarnosky for hard landing. This is going to be rough. The bomber turns northwest, following Pudge's heading. Below, the ocean gives way to scattered islands. Green vegetation replacing blue water. Engine 1 labors under full load. Temperature climbing toward critical range. It's carrying burden meant for 2 engines. Stress exceeding design parameters. Come on, old girl. Just a little further. Zeamer coaxes the aircraft like a tired horse, nursing throttle position, adjusting mixture for maximum efficiency. Fuel gauge drops visibly. Needle moving in real time. Countdown to empty tank and dead engine. 10 minutes remaining. Woodlark Island appears ahead. Small, mostly jungle, with a single brown scar across its center where someone cleared vegetation for an emergency strip. 5 minutes remaining. I see the strip. No visible obstructions. Wind looks calm. Zeamer lines up approach, compensating for failed hydraulics and limited control authority. The bomber responds sluggishly to input. Systems degraded past reliable function. No hydraulics means no brakes. We're going to slide on landing. Everyone brace for impact. 2 minutes remaining. Engine 1 coughs. Once, twice. Fuel starvation beginning. We're empty, gliding now. The engine dies. Propeller windmills freely, generating drag but no power. The bomber becomes glider, trading altitude for distance in fixed ratio determined by physics. 1 minute. Ground rushing up, trees, clearings. The brown strip growing larger. Hold on! The bomber drops below treetops. Wings clip vegetation on both sides. Branches snap. Leaves shower across canopy. Touchdown harder than any landing. Wheels impact packed earth with force that compresses struts to their limits. Metal groans. Rivets pop. No brakes. Only drag and friction. They slide. Dirt sprays. The bomber veers left as weight shifts unevenly. Zeamer fights to maintain direction using rudder and remaining control surfaces. 300 yards. 200. 100. The bomber shudders to stop at the far end of the strip, nose tilted down, tail section elevated on collapsed struts. Silence except for ticking metal as hot components cool. Nobody moves for long seconds. Shock and relief paralyze action. Then the hatch opens. Abel climbs out first, stumbling, legs barely holding him. He turns to help Sarnowski, who can't move without assistance. Pudge emerges, blood running from multiple shrapnel cuts, staining his flight suit. Zeamer is last. He looks at the bomber, taking inventory of damage. Over 500 bullet holes. Tail section shredded beyond recognition. Engine 2 burned and seized. Fuselage perforated like cheese. Cockpit canopy cracked in spiderweb patterns. Blood streaks the interior. They should be dead. Every statistical model says this mission ends in total loss. But they're standing. Wounded, battered, traumatized, but standing. Sarnowski collapses onto packed earth, consciousness fading. Abel tries to stabilize him, applying pressure to wounds with torn cloth and desperate hope. Local ground crew runs toward them from a distant building, attracted by the crash landing. Medics will arrive soon. Medical care, transport. They survived. Zeamer stands beside the bomber's nose, hand resting on bullet-torn aluminum. The old plane saved their lives by refusing to quit, held together by determination and luck, and the engineering margins built into its construction decades ago. Thanks, old girl. One last flight. The photographs in Sarnowski's camera survived intact. Intelligence that will save hundreds of lives in future operations. 3 airfields mapped. Fuel depots located. Transport schedules documented. They completed the mission. Against probability, against doctrine, against every reasonable expectation. And they proved something. That intellect can triumph over instinct. That calculated risk beats blind courage. That physics doesn't lie, even when humans refuse to believe the equations. Zeamer sits heavily on the ground beside the bomber's wheel, exhaustion overwhelming adrenaline. His legs shake, his hands tremble. The cost of maintaining control for 6 hours shows itself now that control is no longer required. Pudge sits beside him, saying nothing. No words necessary. They watch medics work on Sarnowski, performing triage, preparing evacuation. His breathing is shallow but steady, critical but alive. In 48 hours, intelligence officers will develop the photographs and realize what they captured. In 72 hours, senior commanders will demand detailed debriefing. In 1 week, medals will be discussed. But right now, in this moment, there's only 6 men and 1 battered bomber sitting on a remote island, having achieved the impossible through calculation and courage combined. The smartest move isn't always the fastest. Sometimes it's the one nobody expects. Sometimes it's slowing down when every instinct screams to speed up. Sometimes it's trusting math when faith seems insufficient. Zeamer proved it works. The throttle reduction technique, dismissed as dangerous nonsense by superiors, saved 6 lives and secured critical intelligence. Now comes the hard part, explaining how they survived, convincing others that the impossible is merely improbable when you calculate correctly. But that's tomorrow's problem. Today they breathe, they bleed, they live, and sometimes that's enough. Evacuation arrives 6 hours later. A C-47 transport lands on the emergency strip, throwing up dust that coats everything in fine powder. Medics carry Sarnowski on a stretcher, unconscious now, Morphine finally administered when it became clear he couldn't help anyone anymore. The rest of the crew walks to the aircraft under their own power. Though Abel needs support from ground personnel, Zeamer climbs aboard last, pausing at the door to look back at the B-25 sitting broken at the strip's end. Tail number 41301. The bomber that shouldn't have flown, the crew that shouldn't have survived, the mission that should have killed them all. A ground technician follows his gaze. We'll salvage what we can, Captain, but that bird's done flying. Zeamer nods without response. Some things serve their purpose once and need nothing more. The flight back to WW2 takes 90 minutes. Nobody speaks. Exhaustion and shock create silence more profound than sleep. Zeamer stares out the small window, watching ocean pass below, calculating nothing, thinking everything. They land at dusk. Ambulances wait on the tarmac, red crosses vivid in fading light. Sarnosky gets loaded first, still unconscious, breathing shallow through damaged lungs. The medics work with efficient urgency, starting IVs, checking vitals, preparing for surgery. Zeamer refuses the stretcher offered to him. I can walk. The flight surgeon examines him anyway, right there on the tarmac. Shrapnel wounds in both legs. Bullet fragments lodged in shoulder tissue. Lacerations across hands from gripping controls. Severe dehydration. Possible concussion. You need immediate treatment, Captain. After debriefing. That's not a request. You're going to the medical tent. But base operations arrives before the argument resolves. A Colonel Zeamer doesn't recognize, accompanied by intelligence officers carrying clipboards and cameras. Captain Zeamer, we need those photographs immediately. Abel hands over Sarnosky's camera equipment, still stained with blood. Handle it carefully. Sarnosky nearly died for those images. The intelligence officers rush away toward their developing facility. The colonel remains, studying Zeamer with an expression mixing curiosity and disbelief. You flew into Bougainville. 6 Zeros engaged you. You made it back. It's not a question, but Zeamer answers anyway. Yes, sir. We'll debrief tomorrow morning. 0800 hours. Get your wounds treated. The medical tent smells of antiseptic and blood and fear. Wounded men occupy most of the cots. Casualties from other missions, other disasters. Some moan, some cry, some lie silent, staring at canvas ceiling, processing trauma through catatonia. Zeamer sits on an examination table while a surgeon removes shrapnel from his legs. Local anesthetic dulls the pain, but not the sensation of metal being extracted from muscle tissue. You're lucky. These missed major vessels by millimeters. Luck. Everyone attributes survival to luck, as if probability operates independently of preparation. The surgeon moves to his shoulder, probing for bullet fragments with forceps. The procedure takes 20 minutes. Each piece of metal clinks into a metal tray with accusatory sound. How's Sarnosky? The surgeon doesn't look up from his work. Critical. He's in surgery now. Punctured lung, internal bleeding, significant shrapnel damage. Next 24 hours will determine outcome. Zeamer closes his eyes. Sarnosky volunteered because Zeamer recruited him. Trusted the math. Believed the calculations. Now he's dying on an operating table, while Zeamer sits here being praised for luck. The surgeon finishes, bandaging the wounds with practiced efficiency. You'll walk, but flying's done for a while. These injuries need weeks to heal properly. How long? 6 weeks minimum. Probably longer. 6 weeks. A lifetime in combat terms. The war won't wait for his recovery. Pudge and Abel receive similar treatment in adjacent stations. Their wounds are less severe but numerous. Abel's back is peppered with shrapnel from the destroyed tail section. Pudge has lacerations across arms and face from flying debris. They don't speak during treatment. Trauma creates its own language, communicated through shared silence. By midnight, the photographs are developed. Intelligence officers spread them across light tables in the operations building, magnifying glasses revealing details invisible to naked eye. 3 airfields, not 2. Major staging area. Fuel depot locations, precise to the meter. Ship movements documented. Troop concentrations visible. Defensive positions mapped. The lead intelligence officer stares at the images for long minutes before speaking to his subordinates. This is comprehensive. Better than anything we've obtained from Bougainville, these photos will inform operations for months. He marks coordinates on tactical maps, correlating photographic evidence with existing intelligence. Patterns emerge: supply routes, defensive gaps, vulnerabilities. How many men did we lose getting these? An aide checks mission logs. 0 casualties, sir. Entire crew survived. The intelligence officer looks up sharply. That's impossible. This mission was classified as voluntary because survival probability approached 0. I'm reading the report correctly, sir. 6 men flew in, 6 men returned, various injuries, 1 critical, but all alive. The intelligence officer studies the photographs again, seeing them differently now. Not just intelligence product, but evidence of something unprecedented. Get me everything on that crew. Flight records, personnel files, mission logs. I want to understand how they survived this. By 0300 hours, senior commanders are reviewing the photographs. By 0500, operational plans are being revised based on the new intelligence. By 0700, someone asks the question everyone's thinking. How did one bomber fight off 6 zeros in return? Zeamer lies on a medical cot, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. His mind replays the engagement repeatedly, analyzing each maneuver, measuring performance against prediction. The throttle reduction worked. Physics proved reliable, but Sarnosky is dying and no equation accounts for that cost. At 0800, a colonel arrives at the medical tent. Full bird colonel, senior operations. He carries a folder thick with documents. Captain Zeamer, we need to talk. The colonel pulls a chair beside Zeamer's cot, dismissing the medical staff with a gesture. Privacy matters now. Tell me what happened up there. All of it. Zeamer recounts the mission chronologically. Photo run completion, 6 zeros engaging, standard evasion failing, the decision to attempt throttle reduction, multiple successful executions, damage accumulation, emergency landing. The colonel listens without interrupting, occasionally making notes in the margin of his documents. When Zeamer finishes, silence extends for uncomfortable duration. Your crew says you did something unusual, something they'd never seen before. Yes, sir. Explain. Zeamer explains the physics, pursuit geometry, energy states, overshoot windows, defensive firing opportunities created by deceleration. The colonel's expression remains neutral throughout the technical explanation. This technique, you developed it? Yes, sir. You pitched it to operations 3 months ago. Operations rejected it as tactically unsound. So the colonel did his research. He knows about the failed proposal. Yes, sir. Then you took a suicide mission specifically to test an unauthorized combat maneuver. The weight of the question settles between them. Court-martial offenses hide in those words: insubordination, reckless endangerment, violation of doctrine. Zeamer meets his gaze directly. I took a mission nobody else would fly. I used every tool available to complete it and survive. That included techniques operations had dismissed. That's not what I asked, Captain. The colonel leans forward, voice dropping. I need you to answer honestly. Did you plan this? Did you take this mission knowing you would test your theory, regardless of orders or doctrine? This is the moment. Truth or comfortable lie. Court-martial or commendation. The choice crystallizes in the space between heartbeats. Yes, sir. I planned it. I calculated it. I knew standard doctrine gave us 12% survival probability. I believed this technique could improve our odds, so I tested it. You risked your crew's lives on a theory. I risked our lives on physics, sir. The equations were sound. The principle was valid. Someone needed to prove it worked. And if you'd been wrong, then we'd have died proving doctrine correct. Either way, intelligence would have learned something. The colonel stands, pacing beside the cot. His boots make hollow sounds on the wooden floorboards. You should be relieved of command for this, for violating doctrine, for unauthorized tactical experimentation. Zeamer waits. There's always a but following such statements. But you're also the reason 6 men came home who shouldn't have, and those photographs might save hundreds more in future operations. The colonel stops pacing, looking directly at Zeamer. You put me in an impossible position, Captain. I can't officially condone what you did. It violates every principle of military discipline. But I also can't ignore the results. What happens now, sir? Now? Now I write a report that somehow explains this without encouraging every pilot to start freelancing their own tactics. The colonel leaves without another word, folder tucked under his arm, expression troubled. 3 days pass. Sarnosky survives surgery but remains critical. Infection sets in despite antibiotics. His fever climbs. Medics work constantly, but the damage is extensive and his body is worn from months of malaria. On the 4th day, he dies. Quietly in the early morning, while Zeamer sits beside his cot holding his hand. The death hits harder than enemy fire. Sarnosky trusted the calculations, followed the plan, did everything right, and died anyway. Zeamer stares at the body for long minutes, searching for equations that explain this. Finding none. War doesn't balance sheets. It accumulates debts that compound without resolution. 1 week after the mission, formal orders arrive. Base formation at 0900 hours. Full dress uniforms required. The announcement mentions nothing about purpose, but everyone understands. Award ceremony. Zeamer stands at attention in the June heat, uniform pressed, wounds bandaged beneath fabric. Pudge and Abel flank him, similarly prepared. An empty space exists where Sarnosky should stand. The base commander reads citations from prepared texts, words formal and distant. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as pilot of a bomber aircraft on a scouting mission over strongly defended enemy territory. The Medal of Honor, presented posthumously to Sarnosky, presented to Zeamer. The highest decoration, reserved for actions that transcend normal duty. Distinguished Service Crosses for the remaining crew. Recognition cascading down through ranks. Photographers document the ceremony. Reporters ask questions. Everyone wants the story of how one bomber defeated 6 Zeros. Zeamer provides minimal answers. Technical responses devoid of drama. The reporters look disappointed, wanting heroic narrative instead of physics lectures. After the ceremony, the colonel pulls Zeamer aside again. You're being reassigned. Stateside. Training command. The words land like physical blows. Sir, I can still fly. Your injuries say otherwise. Medical evaluation recommends minimum 6 months before combat clearance. Probably longer. Then I'll train until cleared. You're not understanding, Captain. This isn't about your injuries. You're more valuable as an instructor than as a pilot. We need you teaching others what you know. The bitter truth crystallizes. Medal of Honor recipient. Combat career ended. Recognition and exile delivered simultaneously. When do I leave? 2 weeks. That gives you time to debrief intelligence thoroughly and prepare training materials. Zeamer salutes mechanically. The colonel returns it with something resembling sympathy. The crew gathers one final time in the operations tent. They're being split up, reassigned to different squadrons. The brass doesn't want them talking too much about unconventional tactics. Abel pours rot-gut whiskey into metal cups, passing them around. To Sarnosky, he trusted the math even when it scared him. They drink. The whiskey burns, cheap and harsh, but shared. Pudge raises his cup again. To the boss who actually tried to keep us alive instead of just looking good on paper? Another drink. Silence follows. They're breaking us up because we're dangerous. Abel's statement hangs in the air. Truth everyone recognizes. Not dangerous to the enemy, dangerous to the system. We proved you don't have to follow doctrine blindly. That scares people more than Japanese fighters. Zeamer sets down his cup. But you'll remember. You'll use the technique if you need it? All of them nod. Every time, boss. Every time. They shake hands, exchange addresses that probably won't remain current, make promises to stay in touch that probably won't survive demobilization. Then they walk away to separate assignments, separate wars, carrying lessons learned in blood and mathematics. Training command at Randolph Field, Texas. Far from combat, far from the Pacific, far from anything that matters. Zeamer arrives in July 1943, assigned to advanced tactical instruction. The base is clean, organized, safe. Everything the war isn't. His classroom fills with young pilots, fresh from basic training, eager and terrified in equal measure. They're being shipped to combat theaters within months. Most won't survive their first 10 missions. Zeamer doesn't soften the statistics. He puts numbers on the blackboard showing survival curves, loss rates, probability distributions. Standard evasion doctrine gives you these survival odds. They're not good, but they're based on assumptions that might not be complete. A student raises his hand. Sir, are you suggesting we shouldn't follow doctrine? I'm suggesting doctrine is written by people who survived to write it. Learn from them, but also learn that survival sometimes requires thinking beyond the manual. He teaches energy management, pursuit geometry, unpredictability as defensive tool, not as doctrine, but as options. Tools to consider when standard approaches fail. Some students dismiss it as theoretical. Others listen with intensity that suggests understanding. One asks direct question after class. Sir, is it true you slowed down in combat? Against zeros? Zeamer considers how to answer. I changed energy states at critical moments. Yes. And it worked? I'm standing here. Draw your own conclusions. The student leaves thinking, which is all Zeamer can hope to achieve. Word spreads through training pipeline. Zeamer's methods generate discussion, debate, controversy. Some instructors view his approach as dangerous innovation. Others see merit in teaching flexibility over rigid doctrine. 6 months into his training assignment, reports start filtering back. Students who went to Pacific Theater. Some tried the throttle reduction technique. Results vary. One pilot survives 6-fighter engagement using deceleration tactics. Another stalls out attempting the maneuver, crashes, dies. A third combines it with altitude changes, damages 2 zeros, makes it home. Not universal success, but enough positive outcomes to suggest validity. Flight instructors begin incorporating energy management into advanced curricula, not as primary doctrine, but as advanced technique, something to consider in desperate circumstances. Zeamer's name gradually detaches from the method. It becomes simply part of the training continuum, a tool in the toolkit, useful but not revolutionary, which is exactly what makes it effective. Revolutionary ideas die under scrutiny. Practical tools get absorbed into standard practice without fanfare. By late 1944, bomber survival rates in Pacific Theater show measurable improvement. Not dramatic, not everywhere, but the trend line curves upward. Intelligence analysts attribute improvement to multiple factors: better fighter coverage, improved aircraft, more experienced crews, enhanced defensive armament, buried in footnotes of operational reports, tactical variations in evasion protocols showing positive results, no attribution, no names, just acknowledgement that something changed. Captured Japanese pilots interrogated after engagements mention confusion during certain encounters. American bombers behaving unpredictably, targets suddenly changing speed at unexpected moments. Attack rhythms disrupted. 1-0 pilot shot down over Philippines tells interrogators through translator, American bombers became harder to kill, not because they were faster or stronger, because they stopped being predictable. That uncertainty makes aggression costly. The interrogation report gets filed, analyzed, incorporated into tactical assessments. Nobody connects it to one captain's rejected proposal from 1943. The 5th Air Force logs over 10,000 combat sorties in 1944. Survival rate improves by 4% over previous year. 4% sounds insignificant in isolation, but 4% of 10,000 sorties is 400 missions. Average crew size 6 men. 400 missions times 6 men equals 2,400 lives that make it home instead of disappearing over ocean or jungle. 2,400 men who write letters, take photographs, return to families. 2,400 futures that continue instead of ending in fire and water. The math is inexact. Other factors contribute, but somewhere in that 4%, Zeamer's contribution exists. Unmeasured but real. His bomber, tail number 41301, sits in a salvage yard for 18 months before final disposition. Too damaged for repair. Too old for museum preservation. In 1945, it gets scrapped, melted down, recycled into other aircraft, other purposes. No plaque, no memorial. Just returned to constituent materials. Some artifacts deserve preservation through absence rather than presence. The war ends in August 1945. Zeamer receives discharge orders in September. He returns to civilian life carrying Medal of Honor and memories of men who trusted him enough to fly into death. He settles in Connecticut, takes a job with a civil engineering firm, designs bridges and water systems, structures that keep people safe through mathematical precision. His war service gets mentioned during job interviews, but he provides minimal details. The Medal of Honor sits in a drawer, not displayed. He doesn't attend veteran celebrations or give interviews. When colleagues ask about combat experience, his responses are brief and technical. I flew bombers in the Pacific, did photo reconnaissance, came home. That summary omits everything important and includes all facts necessary. He marries in 1947. His wife knows he received the Medal of Honor, but doesn't understand what that means until their children research it for school project years later. Dad, why didn't you tell us? Zeamer looks up from engineering drawings spread across the dining table. Because it's not the important part. The important part is we completed the mission and most of us came home. But you're a hero. I'm an engineer who got lucky applying physics correctly. His children learn not to press. The war is sealed territory, visited rarely and briefly. He designs bridges that span rivers and highways, calculating load factors and stress distributions with the same precision he once applied to fuel consumption and pursuit curves. The math is different, but the principle remains. Get the numbers right and people survive. One bridge he designs in Massachusetts serves for 40 years without significant maintenance. Engineers study it as example of efficient structural design. Nobody knows the designer learned precision under circumstances where mistakes meant death. Veteran reunions happen occasionally. Small gatherings of Pacific theater pilots. Old men telling war stories that grow more embellished with each repetition. Zeamer attends a few. He sits quietly in corners, drinking coffee, listening to tales of missions and crashes and friends lost. Someone inevitably retells the Bougainville story. The details shift over decades. 6 zeros become 8. One damaged engine becomes total engine failure. The emergency landing becomes crash landing in jungle. Zeamer never corrects them. Myths serve purposes that facts cannot. If the story inspires someone or provides comfort, accuracy matters less than function. An old pilot approaches him at one reunion, someone Zeamer doesn't immediately recognize. You don't remember me. I was in your training class. Randolph Field, 1944. Zeamer studies the man's face, searching memory. You taught us about energy management, changing speed at critical moments. I used it over Okinawa. 2 zeros attacking. I throttled down just like you showed us. They overshot. My gunner got one. Saved my crew. The man extends his hand. I never got to thank you properly. So thank you for teaching us to think instead of just react. Zeamer shakes his hand, feeling unexpected weight in the gesture. I'm glad it helped. That's all I wanted. The reunion continues around them. Stories flow. Whiskey flows. Men who faced death together remember when they were young and invincible and terrified. By 1980s, flight schools teach energy management as standard curriculum. The language has evolved. Tactical deceleration protocols. Dynamic velocity adjustment. Technical terms masking simple concept. Sometimes slowing down creates advantage. Instructors teach it without knowing origin. It's simply part of how pilots learn to survive. One technique among many, distinguished only by effectiveness. Military historians occasionally contact Zeamer, researching Pacific air campaigns. He answers their questions with factual brevity. The throttle reduction technique worked by exploiting pursuit geometry assumptions. Enemy pilots calculated intercepts based on target maintaining velocity. Changing that assumption created firing windows. Did you invent this technique? I applied existing physics to specific tactical problem. Others probably reach similar conclusions independently. He deflects credit effortlessly, attributing success to mathematics rather than innovation. One historian presses harder. But you were the first to prove it worked in combat? I was the first to survive long enough to report it. That's different from being first to attempt it. The distinction matters to him, though historians miss the significance. The 1990s bring recognition he never sought. Military aviation organizations want to honor his contributions. He declines speaking engagements politely but firmly. His children, now adults with children of their own, don't understand his reluctance. Dad, they want to celebrate what you did. Why won't you accept? He's in his 70s now, hair white, glasses thicker, but mind still sharp. Because celebrating me means forgetting Sarnosky. He died flying that mission. He trusted the math. He deserves recognition more than I do. You both received the Medal of Honor. He received his posthumously. I got to come home. That's reward enough. Age brings softening but not fundamental change. He remains the engineer who calculates before acting, who values precision over acclaim, who believes getting numbers right matters more than getting credit. In 2003, at age 85, he finally agrees to one interview, a military history project documenting Medal of Honor recipients. The interviewer asks standard questions about the mission, the combat, the survival. Zeamer answers with characteristic brevity and technical precision. The interviewer asks final question. Looking back, do you think your technique changed aerial combat? Zeamer considers this carefully before responding. I think it gave some people a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise. That's all I wanted. Mathematics should serve life, not doctrine. The interview concludes. The video gets archived, preserved for future historians who might care about details versus legends. He dies in 2007, age 88. Heart failure, quick and relatively painless. His obituary in the local newspaper is brief. Jay Zeamer Jr., Medal of Honor recipient, civil engineer, died peacefully at home. Survived by wife, 3 children, 7 grandchildren. Service is private. Most readers don't recognize the name. Those who do remember vaguely that he did something important in World War II, though details escape memory. His Medal of Honor goes to his eldest son, who promises to preserve it properly. The citation gets framed, displayed in family home. Reminder of service and sacrifice. But the real legacy lives elsewhere. In flight schools where instructors teach energy management without knowing its origin. In tactical manuals that describe defensive protocols developed through trial and blood. In survival statistics that show incremental improvements nobody can fully explain. Modern flight training at Pensacola Naval Air Station. An instructor stands before young pilots, explaining advanced defensive tactics. Remember, combat isn't always about being faster or stronger. Sometimes it's about being harder to predict. Change the equation. Make them adapt to you instead of you adapting to them. Students take notes. Absorbing principle without understanding source. The lesson continues to other topics. The instructor never mentions Zeamer, never references Bougainville or 1943, or a crew of misfits who prove that intellect can triumph over instinct. The principle survives independent of attribution, which is the purest form of legacy. Ideas that require names attached die with those names. Ideas that become self-evident truth continue indefinitely. Zeamer understood this instinctively. He never sought credit because credit was irrelevant. The math either worked or it didn't. Physics didn't care about recognition. His old crew members passed away over the decades. Pudge in 1989, Abel in 1995. Others at intervals gradually aged, claiming what combat couldn't. At each funeral, someone tells the Bougainville story. Details vary, emotion intensifies. But core truth remains. 6 men flew into death and calculated their way out. The last surviving member sends letter to Zeamer's family after his death. Your father saved my life by refusing to accept that courage meant dying bravely. He taught us that thinking wasn't cowardice, it was the most effective weapon we had. That lesson served me through 40 years after the war. He changed how I approached every problem. I wanted you to know that. The letter gets saved in family archives, artifact of gratitude expressed decades late. In 2015, a military history blogger researches lesser-known Medal of Honor recipients. Zeamer's story emerges, partially documented through declassified mission reports and crew interviews. The blog post goes viral briefly. People fascinated by bookworm pilot who defeated Zeros with physics. The story gets shared, retold, embellished. Then it fades again. Internet moving to newer content, shorter attention spans. But some readers, particularly those with engineering backgrounds, save the story. Share it with students. Use it as example of how technical knowledge applied intelligently can solve problems that brute force cannot. The cycle continues. Information spreading through unpredictable channels, reaching audiences Zeamer never imagined, serving purposes he never intended. That's how ideas persist, not through monuments or memorials, but through utility and transmission. On a training base somewhere, an instructor teaches defensive tactics that originated in desperation over Bougainville. In a classroom somewhere, a professor uses the throttle reduction technique as case study in applied physics. In a cockpit somewhere, a pilot faced with impossible odds remembers that slowing down might be smarter than speeding up. Zeamer died believing his name would be forgotten. He was correct about the name, but wrong about the legacy. The smartest move isn't always the fastest. Sometimes it's the one nobody expects. Sometimes it's trusting that ideas matter more than credit. Sometimes it's accepting that saving lives is sufficient reward, regardless of whether history remembers who did the saving. War produces countless heroes. Most earn glory through firepower or sacrifice. Zeamer earned his through patience and precision and the stubborn belief that mathematics could keep people alive when courage alone proved insufficient. He never sought fame. He sought answers, and in finding them, gave his crew and hundreds of others a chance to come home. His plane was scrapped, his name faded, but the principle endures wherever people learn that survival sometimes requires doing the opposite of what feels safe, that wisdom, bought with blood and calculation, remains the only memorial worth having.